In this video, we're going to go through how to multiply two radicals together, and if there is a radical in the denominator, how to rationalize the denominator is what that is called. So first off, we're going to multiply radicals, and if we need to multiply two of the radicals together, this will help us when we get to our special right triangles, because we will need to multiply when we're solving our different questions. And what you have to remember is that the radicand does not need to be the identical number to begin with. So remember, the radicand is the number inside the square root. So here's the 6 and this one is the 10. We need to multiply the numbers outside together and multiply the numbers that are inside the radical together. And then we can simplify that answer. So here we just have two numbers that are inside, so we can multiply that together so we get a 60, and now we just need to simplify it like we did originally. So you get a 6 and a 10, we have a 2 and a 3. 10 gives us a 2 and a 5, so I've got a pair of 2's will go on the outside, and inside is my 3 and my 5 that I need to multiply back together. So this will give me a 2 square root 15. We still are going to go through writing the exact and non-exact answer. So this would give me 7.746 would be the non-exact answer. That'll help you when you get into your simplifying and just checking to see if you did that correctly. So in number 2, you can see that there is a number on the outside, and a number on the outside of the second one would be a 1. So if I multiply 2 times 1, I get a 2. Now if we multiply the numbers inside together, so 12 times 15 gives us 180. And now I need to simplify the 180. An easy pair to start with could be 18 and 10. So 18 gives us a 2 and a 9. The 9 gives us a pair of 3's. The 10 would give us a 2 and a 5, and then I've got a pair of 2's there with the 5 left over. So I have an orange 2 on the outside. I have my pair of 2's, and I have a pair of 3's on the outside, and then my 5 is left over in the inside. So 2 times 2 times 3 on the outside will give us a 12 square root of 5. My non-exact answer should be 26.833. All right, so for number 3, I want you to try this one yourself now. So multiply just the outside numbers together, and then multiply just the inside numbers together, and then reduce it. So now that you have multiplied it, your outside number should become a negative 15. 18 times 2 becomes 36, and if you remember, that is a perfect square, so you get a pair of 6's to bring outside. So you have a negative 15 times your 6, and then there will be nothing left inside, and that simplifies then to a negative 90 when you multiply it, and that is both your exact and your estimated answer. All right, so these next two, I did those specifically. If you notice, they are both the same numbers. They are multiplying together, but we need to understand why they come out with the answers they do to help us in this bottom section on your notes. So if we take 10 times 10, we get the square root of 100, and the square root of 100 gives us a pair of 10's, so my answer is just a 10. On here, we get the square root of 4 for number 5. The square root of 4, I've got a pair of 2, so my answer is a 2. So one thing I want you to notice is that if you have the same number underneath the radical, when you multiply it together, it becomes a perfect square of those numbers. So it just becomes a plain 10 with no more square root. Same thing with the 2's. So if I have the same number underneath the radical, when I multiply it, I can take the square root of it, and I get it's a perfect square of that same number. For the answer on number 6, I put it up there. That was just so that you can check it or use it as practice for yourself for another one if you want to do another practice question. Moving on to the bottom part of your notes, we are rationalizing the denominator. And what that means is if you have a fraction and you have a radical in the denominator, it's not technically simplified all the way unless there's no more radical in it. So we need to get rid of the square root in the denominator so that our fraction is simplified as far as it can go. And what that is we need to multiply the denominator and the numerator, but it's mostly the denominator, by a radical that's going to eliminate the radical. And if you remember, from what we were talking about up here in this number 4 and number 5, we want to get rid of the radical. So notice if we multiply it by itself, it will get rid of the radical in the end. And that's what we have to do down here for this bottom section. That means on number 7, to get rid of the square root of 2, is if I multiply it by the square root of 2, that means my denominator will become the square root of 4, which then becomes just a plain 2. But I can't just multiply it by the square root of 2 on the bottom without doing anything to the top, because we want to simplify. We do not want to change the original number. So if I check the decimal answer, it should be the same at the beginning and same at the end. So I need to multiply it by the square root of 2 on the top and the bottom, because if you think about it, this really simplifies to a 1. So if I'm multiplying the fraction by a 1, it's not going to change the final decimal number. It's still going to be the same decimal. But now we need to multiply 3 times the square root of 2. We're going straight across. But 3 and my square root of 2 cannot be combined together, so I just leave it as 3 square root 2. Here, I cannot simplify anything else, so that would be my exact answer. My decimal answer then, if I type that in the calculator, you should get 2.121. And again, if you type this in, you should get the same exact decimal as if you did it from the very end as well. So that's a way you can check your answer to see if you did it correctly. The decimal from the very beginning problem and the final answer should be the same decimal answer. All right, so going on to number 8, we see a square root of 8 in the denominator, so I need to multiply it by the square root of 8 on the top and the bottom, because that fraction itself equals 1. So when I go straight across, the 5 and the 8 on top are inside, so I can multiply those together, and 5 times 8 gives me 40. On the denominator then, 8 times 8 gives me the square root of 64, but I know that the square root of 64 just comes out as a plain 8 because I can do my branches, and I get a pair of 8, so it's just an 8. On the top, I need to do my branches off of there, so I've got a 4 and a 10. I have a pair of 2s with my 4, and my 10, I have a 5 and a 2, but nothing is going to be left over from that, so I can't pull out any more pairs. So all I can pull out is a 2. Inside then, I put the 5 and the 2 back together, and it becomes a 10. So right here, what you have to look at to see if you can simplify, either the numbers have to be both outside the square root, or they have to be both inside the square root to simplify. This 8 is not in a radical, so it's not a radicand. So I can simplify this 2 and the 8 on the outside and reduce it. So my square root of 10 is still there, but 2 over 8 becomes 1/4. So this would be my exact answer in the end. For the decimal, I get 0.791. We are just going to jump all the way down to number 11 just because of the type of work that's going to be showing up in the problem. And we see the square root of 2. So we need to multiply it by the square root of what number? That's what I want you to fill in over off to the side. All right, you should be filling in the square root of 2 on top and bottom because it all depends on what the denominator is, not the top. And when I multiply that, I can take my 3 and my 2, I can multiply that together, so I get a 6. The 12 just stays on the outside by itself. The denominator then becomes the square root of 4. We know that that is a perfect square, so I get just a plain 2. And I still have my 12 and my 6. I can't reduce the 6 part of it, but I can reduce this 12 and the 2 on the outside. So I want you to reduce it, and now tell me what should your answer be after you reduce it. The 12 divided by 2 gives you a 6, and then you still have the square root of 6 on the top, so there is your exact answer. When you simplify that then with your decimal, you get 14.697 as your final answer on number 11. If we move back up to number 10, I want to just show you one thing about this. Is notice the 7 and the 21 are both underneath the radical. You can simplify that first before you do anything else. So if you reduce the 7 and the 21, since they're both underneath the radical, the 9 stays the same, but if you divide both of them by 7, that gives you a 1 over a 3. Now the square root of 1 itself is just 1, so in a sense this is really just 9 over the square root of 3, and now we've got a whole new question. So now I want you to try to simplify that all on your own for the rest of it. So the first step you should have done is multiply by the square root of 3 on the top and the bottom. When we multiply, you should have gotten 9 square root 3 over. The bottom becomes the square root of 9, which just becomes a regular 3 in the end. So you still have your 9 square root 3 on top. The 9 and the 3 on the outside you can reduce, which becomes a 3, and then your square root of 3 is still there. And that should be your exact answer. Your estimated then, your decimal answer would be 5.96. For the very last question, we're going down to number 14. I'm just jumping around a little bit. And I want you to reduce this first. And then I want you to find what your final answer will be. All right, so if you reduce it, you can divide both of those by 3. So you get the square root of 5 over the square root of 8. Now you need to multiply it by the square root of 8 because that's the part we need to get rid of. So not the 5, but the 8 is the part you have to get rid of. So we end up with a negative square root of 40 on top, divided by the square root of 64, which is a perfect square. So you have a pair of 8s. So I end up with just a regular 8 on the bottom. The 40 we need to do our factor tree for, so we get a 4 and a 10. You get a pair of 2s, and then you have a 5 and a 2 left over. So we'd have just a plain 2 on the outside from here, from your pair. And inside we need to multiply the 2 and the 5 back together. Lastly, you have to reduce even this part of it. So our square root of 10 stays the same on top, but now the 2 and the 8 reduces to a 1/4. So there's your exact answer. For your decimal answer, you should have gotten 0.791 as your final answer.